Captain Alec Morrow stood at the command center of the Vigilant, his eyes scanning the screens in front of him. The hum of the ship's engines filled the room, but there was an unsettling silence hanging in the air. The Deathworlder fleet had just received the SOS signal from the Xika homeworld, and Captain Morrow had a feeling that the mission ahead was going to be more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "Sir, we are approaching the Xika system," reported Lieutenant Sarah Collins, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "Our sensors are picking up Grothar ships. Their numbers are overwhelming." Morrow's jaw tightened. The Grothar, a species known for their brutal conquests and merciless attacks, were unlike any enemy they had faced before. The Deathworlders were used to dangerous situations, but this was different. The Xika were peaceful and technologically underdeveloped, no match for the savage Grothar. "Prepare the fleet for engagement," Morrow ordered, his voice calm but firm. He didn't need to say more. His crew knew what was at stake. The fate of an entire species was hanging in the balance. The Vigilant and the rest of the Deathworlder fleet emerged from hyperspace and entered the Xika system. The sight of the alien planet below was sobering. The Xika world, once a serene and beautiful place, was now under siege. The Grothar ships, large and intimidating, surrounded the planet, bombarding it with weapons that lit up the sky like firestorms. The once peaceful land was now a battlefield. Morrow glanced at his tactical screen, his mind racing. There was no time to waste. The Grothar were already starting to land their forces on the surface, and the Xika were helpless. Morrow's gaze shifted to the small, fragile ships that the Xika had sent to intercept the SOS. They were no match for the Grothar, and their efforts to fight back had only led to more destruction. "They're almost done for," said Lieutenant Collins, her voice filled with concern. "We have to move fast." "Agreed," Morrow replied, his eyes narrowing. "Get us into position. We're going in." The Vigilant fired its engines and shot toward the planet, the rest of the fleet following closely behind. The Deathworlder ships, although smaller than the Grothar behemoths, were faster and more agile. They were built for speed and combat, a perfect fit for the task ahead. As they descended through the atmosphere, Morrow could see the devastation below. The Xika cities were in ruins, their once towering structures now reduced to rubble. Smoke rose from the surface, and explosions lit up the dark skies. It was a grim sight, and Morrow knew that they had to act quickly before the Xika were wiped out completely. "Deploy the landing teams," Morrow ordered. "We'll fight them on the ground. The Xika need help right now, and we're not going to let them fall." On the surface, the Deathworlder ground forces, led by Lieutenant Lena Grant, prepared for the fight of their lives. The Deathworlders were known for their toughness and relentless fighting spirit, and they would need every ounce of it to survive this battle. Armed with advanced weapons and equipped with high-tech armor, they were ready for whatever the Grothar could throw at them. Lieutenant Grant's team landed in the heart of a ruined Xika city. The streets were eerily silent, the only sounds coming from the distant gunfire and the rumble of explosions. The team moved quickly, taking cover behind the shattered remnants of buildings as they surveyed the area. The Grothar were everywhere, their heavily armored soldiers patrolling the streets, looking for survivors. "We can't let them take this city," Grant said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll push them back, no matter what it takes." Her team moved swiftly, taking out Grothar patrols and clearing the area. The Grothar were strong, but they weren't used to the guerrilla tactics of the Deathworlders. Every corner they turned, every building they cleared, the Deathworlders showed the Grothar the true meaning of resistance. Back in orbit, Morrow watched the battle unfold on the screen. The Deathworlders were relentless, and their tactics were proving effective. The Xika, although peaceful, had their own way of fighting. They used their knowledge of their world to help the humans navigate through the destroyed cities and make the most of their surroundings. Morrow knew that this wasn't just about defeating the Grothar. It was about showing the Xika that there was hope. That with the right allies, Even the most peaceful species could stand up to the darkness of the galaxy. Captain Collins interrupted his thoughts, her voice tense. There's a large Grothar force approaching from the north. We're going to need reinforcements. Morrow's eyes hardened. We'll give them reinforcements. Prepare the heavy artillery. Let's make sure the Grothar learn the cost of underestimating the Deathworlders. As the Vigilant moved into position above the planet, the ground forces prepared for their next wave of attacks. The Deathworlders were ready to prove that even the darkest of times could be overcome with courage, strategy, and the will to fight. The sky above the Taika homeworld burned with the fire of battle. Captain Alec Morrow's ship, the Vigilant, hovered above the planet, surrounded by the Deathworlder fleet. Below, the Taika cities smoldered in ruins, and the Grothar ships continued their relentless assault. Morrow stood on the command bridge, staring at the screens that displayed the chaos unfolding below. The battle was growing fiercer by the minute. The Grothar had superior firepower, but the Deathworlders had something they couldn't predict: the determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. "Sir, the Grothar are focusing their fire on the northern cities," Lieutenant Sarah Collins reported, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Scifi forces are too weak to resist." "Then we'll give them strength," Morrow replied, his voice firm. "Prepare the dropships. We're going down there." The Deathworlder fleet wasn't just about firepower, it was about adaptability. Morrow knew the success of the mission would depend on how well they fought on the ground. They couldn't just fight from space. They had to show the Scifi that they weren't alone. With the orders given, the Deathworlder soldiers, including Lieutenant Lena Grant and her team, boarded the dropships. The Taika were a peaceful species, not trained for war, but they had a fierce will to survive. And that, Morrow knew, was something they could work with. The dropships descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere, cutting through the clouds to the battlefield below. On the ground, the Deathworlders were met with destruction. The once beautiful Taika cities were now battle zones, with crumbling buildings and smoke rising into the sky. The Grothar had taken control of most of the urban areas, using their overwhelming force to strike fear into the Taika people. "Stay focused, team," Lieutenant Grant called out to her squad as they landed in a devastated street. "We're here to save lives, not to die. Move out." The Deathworlders quickly spread out, moving with precision and confidence. Their training had prepared them for moments like this. They have fought in countless battles, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a mission to defeat an enemy. It was a fight to protect a world on the brink of extinction. The Grothar were everywhere. Their soldiers, massive and armored, stomped through the streets, smashing everything in their path. They were ruthless, showing no mercy to the Taika who tried to fight back. But the Deathworlders were different. They didn't fight for power. They fought to ensure that the innocent were safe. Lieutenant Grant's team encountered their first Grothar patrol near a collapsed building. The Grothar didn't see them coming. With swift and calculated moves, the Deathworlders took them down one by one. The Grothar's brute force was no match for the Deathworlders' quick thinking and battle-hardened strategies. "We have to keep moving," Grant said, her voice sharp as she checked her weapons. "The Taika need us." Meanwhile, Captain Morrow and the Vigilant remained in orbit, providing air support to the ground troops. The Grothar ships were powerful, but the Deathworlder fleet had superior tactics. Morrow had ordered the fleet to focus on the Grothar's command ships, hoping to break their coordination and give the ground forces a chance. On the planet's surface, the Taika, though untrained for battle, were doing their part. Their knowledge of their own world proved to be an advantage. They guided the Deathworlder troops through the ruins, showing them hidden paths and safe routes to avoid Grothar patrols. The once peaceful species had quickly adapted, fighting alongside their new allies with a determination that surprised even the Deathworlders. As the battle raged on, Morrow saw the tide beginning to turn. The Deathworlders were relentless, pushing the Grothar back, one city block at a time. But they were up against a powerful enemy. The Grothar weren't backing down. Their attacks became more brutal, and they unleashed bioweapons that threatened to wipe out entire districts of the Taika cities. "This won't stop until we take out their main base," Morrow muttered to himself, staring at the display. He had to make a decision. The Grothar were using weapons that could destroy entire regions, and if they weren't stopped, the Taika would be wiped out. "Lieutenant Collins, prepare the fleet for a full-scale assault." "I'm sending down reinforcements," Morrow ordered. "We need to end this now." Grant's team continued to press forward, moving closer to the Grothar's central command post. The fighting was intense, with the Grothar sending wave after wave of soldiers to defend their position. But the Deathworlders' resolve was unshakable. "We're getting close," Grant said, her eyes scanning the area. "I can feel it. We just need to push a little further." As they neared the Grothar command post, the Deathworlder troops encountered heavier resistance. The Grothar knew the battle was turning against them and were determined to protect their final stronghold. But the Deathworlders didn't hesitate. With a rallying cry, they stormed the building, cutting down Grothar soldiers and advancing toward their objective. In orbit, Morrow watched with a sense of pride. The Deathworlders were winning, but they still had a long way to go. The battle was far from over. But as long as they kept pushing forward, as long as they didn't give up, victory was within reach. The ground shook as explosions erupted all around Lieutenant Lena Grant and her team. They were deep within the heart of the Taika's destroyed city, fighting their way through the last pockets of Grothar resistance. The Deathworlders had already made significant progress, but the battle was far from over. The Grothar were relentless, and the Deathworlder forces had to push harder. Grant led her team through the crumbled streets, her weapon ready, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Her soldiers were strong, trained, and motivated, but there was something different about this fight. The Taika, who had once only known peace, were now standing beside them. They were no warriors, but they had courage. "We need to move quickly," Grant said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The Grothar are retreating into the center of the city, and they'll regroup if we don't stop them now." The Deathworlders were relentless, pushing forward with a single goal in mind: to end the Grothar's reign of terror and protect the innocent. The Taika, despite their lack of battle experience, had begun to show signs of resistance. They were following the Deathworlders' lead, helping clear out Grothar patrols, and taking shelter when the fighting grew too intense. "Look at them," Sergeant Mark Tanner observed as he glanced at the Taika. "They're learning fast. I didn't think they'd have the courage to fight, but they've shown us all something today." Grant nodded, her eyes watching a group of Taika fight back against a small squad of Grothar soldiers using rocks and debris as makeshift weapons. They were scared, but they were fighting. That was enough. Meanwhile, in the skies above, Captain Alec Morrow commanded the Vigilant and the rest of the Deathworlder fleet. The space battle had been intense, with Grothar ships firing relentlessly at their attackers. But the Deathworlders were experts at space combat, and their superior tactics and strategies were beginning to overwhelm the Grothar fleet. Morrow could see it. The Grothar were starting to panic. "Sir, we've taken out their flagship," Lieutenant Sarah Collins reported from the tactical station. "The Grothar are disorganized. Their fleet is falling apart." Morrow's gaze remained fixed on the display. The battle in space was critical, but the true fight was on the ground. He knew that if the Deathworlders didn't succeed in liberating the Taika, no victory in space would matter. Back on the planet's surface, the Deathworlder soldiers were pushing into the heart of the Grothar defenses. The Grothar had set up heavy fortifications around their central command post, but they hadn't counted on the Deathworlders' resilience. Even though the Grothar had superior weapons, the Deathworlders' ability to adapt and improvise in any situation gave them the edge. Grant and her team stormed into a building that had been converted into a Grothar command center. The air was thick with smoke, and the walls were lined with strange alien technology. As they advanced, they encountered Grothar soldiers, but the Deathworlders' tactics proved superior. Their speed and precision overwhelmed the Grothar's brute strength. "This is it," Grant said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "We take down their command post, and we win this battle." The team moved deeper into the building, clearing out rooms one by one. It was slow work, but the Deathworlders knew how to clear rooms and handle surprises. They didn't hesitate. They didn't second-guess. Each movement was planned, each step taken with precision. It was the way the Deathworlders fought, calm, deliberate, and unyielding. Outside, the Kaika continued to push back against the remaining Grothar forces. They were no longer passive. They had learned from their human allies, taking cover, firing weapons, and moving in formations. They had learned what it meant to fight for survival. "We've got Grothar closing in from the west," Sergeant Tanner called out. "We need to clear them out before they can reinforce their command center." Grant nodded. "We're almost there. Stick to the plan." The soldiers moved as one, cutting through the remaining Grothar soldiers with ease. Their weapons were deadly, but it was their unity and strength that made them unstoppable. The Grothar were no longer the intimidating force they had been. The Deathworlders' power had shattered their confidence. Back in the city, the fighting was reaching its peak. The Kaika were no longer afraid to fight alongside their human allies. They had embraced the battle, not as warriors, but as survivors. And in doing so, they had found their strength. Morrow watched from orbit, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The Deathworlders had done more than just fight for victory. They had inspired the Kaika to fight for their own future. The humans were showing them that survival wasn't about existing. It was about rising up, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. "Status report, Lieutenant," Morrow said, his voice filled with focus. "The Grothar are retreating," Collins replied. "We've broken their command, and their forces are scattering. The planet is ours." Morrow allowed himself a brief moment of relief before turning his attention back to the battlefield. The victory was far from complete, but it was a turning point. The Grothar had underestimated the power of the Deathworlders, and now they would pay the price. On the ground, Lieutenant Grant's team had reached the heart of the Grothar stronghold. The final push was underway. The Deathworlders were on the brink of victory, and nothing, not even the Grothar, could stand in their way now. The battle was nearing its end. On the surface of the Kaika homeworld, the last remnants of the Grothar forces were being driven back. Lieutenant Lena Grant's team had successfully breached the heart of the Grothar command center, and their victory was all but assured. The Deathworlders had shown the galaxy once again that their resolve was unbreakable. Grant wiped the sweat from her forehead as she surveyed the scene. The Grothar had underestimated the power of their enemies. The Deathworlders, with their relentless drive and unyielding strength, had proven that no force, no matter how brutal, could stand against them for long. "Status report, Sergeant Tanner," Grant called out, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. "Most of the Grothar forces are retreating," Tanner replied, scanning his scanner. "They've lost control of the command center. The Kaika are taking over the outer districts." Grant nodded, feeling a sense of pride. The Kaika, once a peaceful species, had now risen up to fight for their home. They weren't warriors, but they were survivors, and thanks to the Deathworlders' help, they had discovered their strength. "Let's move," Grant ordered. "We need to help the civilians. They're still vulnerable." The Deathworlder team split up, with some heading to the outer districts where the Kaika were recovering and others securing the last remaining Grothar soldiers. The battle wasn't quite over, but victory was within their grasp. The tide had turned, and it had turned because the Deathworlders had fought not just for the Kaika, but alongside them. Meanwhile, in orbit, Captain Alec Morrow watched as the battle wound down. The Grothar fleet had been decimated, and their ships now drifted, abandoned throughout the sky. The Deathworlder fleet had done its part, but Morrow knew the real work was on the ground. The planet below was still recovering, and there was much to do before peace could truly be restored. "Lieutenant Collins," Morrow called out from his command chair. I need a full report on the Grothar's remaining forces. Collins studied her console. The Grothar are done, Captain. Their ships are scattered, and we've destroyed their flagship. The remaining Grothar are disorganized and retreating. It's only a matter of time before they're completely wiped out. Morrow nodded, though a part of him couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for the enemy they had just defeated. The Grothar were brutal, but they were also warriors. They fought with everything they had, and they didn't give up easily. I want to ensure that we're leaving this planet in capable hands, Morrow said, his voice thoughtful. We've helped them reclaim their home, but now they need to rebuild. Make sure we've got the resources to assist. Collins gave a quick salute. Understood, Captain. Down on the planet, the Dithworlders and the Scifi were working side by side to rebuild what had been destroyed. The Scifi, though they had never known war, were showing a resilience that amazed everyone. They were helping clear the debris, treating the wounded, and providing support where it was needed most. The Dithworlders had taught them that survival was more than just existing. It was about taking action, fighting for the future, and never giving up. The sound of children's laughter could be heard for the first time in days as a group of young Scifi played in the streets, freed from the Grothar's reign of terror. It was a small sign, but it was a sign that hope had returned to the planet. The Scifi were beginning to rebuild their homes and their lives. We did it, Sergeant Tanner said, looking around at the scenes of recovery. We've turned this world around. Grant nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. There was still much work to do, but they had given the Scifi the chance they needed. They had helped them find their strength, and they had shown them that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about living, rebuilding, and growing stronger. You know, Tanner continued, I never thought I'd see the day when a peaceful species like the Scifi would rise up and fight back. But they did it. They didn't give up. No, Grant agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. They didn't give up, and neither did we. As the team worked to clear the last pockets of resistance, Captain Morrow received a message from the Scifi leadership. The message was simple, but filled with gratitude. Thank you, Dithworlders. You have given us a future. We will not forget your sacrifice. Morrow smiled, feeling the weight of the words settle in his heart. It wasn't just the battle they had won. It was the hope they had given to an entire species. The Scifi were no longer helpless. They had found their strength, and they would carry that strength forward into the future. We've made a difference, Morrow said quietly, as he gazed down at the planet below. This world, this species, they've earned their chance to live, and we've given it to them. As the Dithworlders finished securing the last of the Grothar forces and began to assist the Scifi in their recovery, a new chapter in the history of this world began. The Scifi had discovered their strength through the trials they had faced, and the Dithworlders had shown them that there was always a way to survive, even in the darkest of times. The sun rose over the Scifi homeworld, casting a golden glow over the ruins of the cities. The battle had ended, but the work had only just begun. The Dithworlders had helped the Scifi reclaim their planet, but now it was time to help them rebuild. Lieutenant Lena Grant stood on the edge of a crumbling building, watching as Scifi civilians worked together with Dithworlder soldiers to clear the debris. It was a slow process, but there was a sense of determination in the air. The Scifi had lost much, but they had gained something far more valuable: hope. Lieutenant Grant, Sergeant Mark Tanner called out as he approached. We've finished securing the last of the Grothar pockets. The planet's safe for now. Grant turned to face him, a small smile on her lips. Good, but we can't rest yet. The Scifi need our help to rebuild. We've given them a chance to survive. Now we have to help them thrive. Tanner nodded. Agreed. The Scifi are tough. I didn't think they had it in them, but they've been fighting alongside us. They're showing real strength. Grant's gaze shifted back to the Scifi workers. They were clearing the remains of buildings, lifting heavy pieces of debris with their strange, slender arms. Though they lacked the military training of the Deathworlders, they had an unmatched will to survive. It was something the Deathworlders had recognized long ago. Survival wasn't about fighting alone. It was about unity. Captain Alec Morrow stood on the command bridge of the Vigilant, watching the progress on the planet below. The Deathworlder fleet was still in orbit, keeping watch over the world they had just saved. The Grothar were gone, their fleet scattered to the winds, and the Scifi were free. But there was still much to be done. "Morrow to Lieutenant Collins," Morrow called out, his voice calm but focused. "Here, Captain," Collins replied, her voice crackling through the comms. "I want to begin planning for the long-term support of the Scifi," Morrow said. "We've given them their freedom, but they'll need our assistance to rebuild their infrastructure. Start organizing resources, medical supplies, anything we can send down." "Understood, Captain. I'll coordinate with the ground teams," Collins responded. Morrow turned his attention back to the planet. It wasn't just about rebuilding buildings or providing supplies. The Scifi needed to rebuild their sense of identity, their sense of unity. The Deathworlders had already done their part by showing them how to fight. Now, they needed to teach them how to thrive. Days passed, and the Deathworlders worked tirelessly alongside the Scifi. Slowly but surely, the cities began to take shape again. The once ruined streets were cleared, and new structures were erected. The Scifi had shown remarkable resilience, learning quickly from their allies. "We've made a real difference here," Tanner said one afternoon as he and Grant helped direct the construction efforts. "It's incredible to see how far they've come." Grant nodded. "They've earned this, Mark. They've earned the right to rebuild their future." Despite the progress, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The Scifi were strong, but they were still a species at war. They had lost so much, and the scars of the conflict still lingered. But there was one thing the Deathworlders had given them that they hadn't expected: a sense of unity. The Scifi were now working together, not just to rebuild their cities, but to rebuild their society. They had learned from the Deathworlders that survival wasn't just about fighting off invaders. It was about standing together in the face of adversity. On the command bridge of the Vigilant, Morrow received a message from the Scifi leadership. The message was simple, but its meaning was clear. "We wish to form an alliance with the Deathworlders. Together, we can ensure the survival of our species and protect our home." Morrow read the message again, a small smile tugging at his lips. The Scifi were no longer just survivors, they were becoming allies. And in that moment, Morrow knew that the galaxy had just gained a powerful new force. "Collins, get the fleet ready," Morrow said, his voice firm. "We're heading to the surface." Collins gave a sharp salute. "Aye, Captain." Preparing to land. On the surface, the Scifi leaders were waiting to meet with the Deathworlder captain. Grant and Tanner stood by Morrow's side as they made their way to the meeting site, where the leaders of the Scifi awaited them. The air was thick with anticipation. The Scifi leaders, tall and graceful, greeted Morrow with respect. They were no longer the timid species that had once been at the mercy of the Grothar. They stood proud, their eyes filled with determination. "Captain Morrow," the leader of the Scifi said, bowing slightly, "we owe you everything. Your people have shown us what it means to fight for our future. And for that, we offer our allegiance. Together, we can protect our home and ensure the safety of all who seek peace." Morrow's eyes softened as he met the leader's gaze. "You've earned it," he said. "The Deathworlders will stand with you. This is just the beginning of a new chapter for both of our peoples." As Morrow and the Scifi leader shook hands, a new alliance was born. The Deathworlders had given the Scifi the strength to survive, and now they would stand together to protect their world and ensure its future. The galaxy had just witnessed the birth of a powerful new partnership, one that would change the course of history. The days after the alliance were filled with excitement and new beginnings. The Scifi were no longer just survivors. They were thriving, growing stronger every day. With the Deathworlders by their side, they had begun to rebuild their cities, their homes, and most importantly, their hope for the future. The bond between the two species had deepened in ways that no one had expected, and it had changed everything. Lieutenant Lena Grant stood at the edge of a newly constructed building, watching the Taika workers move around, their once timid steps now full of confidence. They were still learning, still growing, but they were no longer afraid. They were part of something bigger now, a partnership that would shape the future. "Look at them," Grant said quietly, her voice filled with pride. "They've come so far." Sergeant Mark Tanner stood beside her, his eyes scanning the scene. "Yeah, they have, and we've helped them get here. It's amazing to see them building their world again." Grant nodded, her gaze softening. "It's not just about the buildings, Mark. It's about everything. Their belief in themselves, their willingness to stand up, to fight, to be more than what they were. And we were there to help them find that strength." Tanner smiled. "We gave them a fighting chance. They ran with it." Captain Alec Morrow watched from orbit as the Taika world slowly came back to life. The Deathworlder fleet remained in place, its presence a quiet but steady reminder of the support the Deathworlders had given. The Grothar were a thing of the past, their fleet shattered and their forces scattered. The Taika were safe, and they were no longer alone. "Captain, we've received another communication from the Taika leadership," Lieutenant Sarah Collins reported as she entered the command bridge. "They want to formally discuss the terms of the alliance." Morrow looked up from the console, his eyes thoughtful. "Send down a team, Sarah. Let's make sure we're all on the same page." On the surface, the Taika gathered in the newly constructed meeting hall. The leader of the Taika, a tall and graceful figure named Sara, stood at the front, waiting for the Deathworlders to arrive. Her eyes shone with hope, a far cry from the fear that had once clouded her people's hearts. As Morrow and his team arrived, Sara greeted them with a deep bow. "Captain Morrow, we are honored to have you here. We have seen the strength of your people, and we are grateful for the alliance we have formed." Morrow nodded, his gaze steady. "The honor is ours. Your people have proven that, when united, there is nothing you cannot achieve. Together, we will ensure that peace prevails across this galaxy." Sara smiled, a soft but proud expression. "We know we are not alone. We have fought alongside you, and now we will fight beside you, whenever and wherever it is needed." The leader's words echoed in Morrow's mind, as he realized just how far the Taika had come. They had not only survived, they had learned to stand tall and proud, to protect their future. And now they had an ally in the Deathworlders, a force unlike any other in the galaxy. "We will work together," Morrow said, his voice steady. "The galaxy is vast, and there are many dangers out there, but we will face them together. No one will threaten the peace we have fought for." Back at the command center, the Deathworlders and Taika worked together, setting up the framework for their new alliance. The Deathworlders taught the Taika how to improve their technologies, how to strengthen their defenses, and how to adapt to the changing world around them. The Taika, in return, shared their knowledge of the natural world, teaching the Deathworlders about the wonders of their planet. The two species had discovered something vital in each other, a shared desire for peace, for survival, and for a future built on cooperation. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew that they had the strength and the will to face them. As days turned into weeks, the alliance between the Deathworlders and the Taika grew stronger. Joint training exercises became common, and the once quiet Taika began to speak with pride about their partnership with the Deathworlders. They were no longer a species that feared the future. They were a species that had embraced it. Lieutenant Grant and Sergeant Tanner stood together, watching a group of Taika soldiers train alongside their Deathworlder counterparts. It was a moment of triumph, a symbol of everything they had accomplished together. "They've come a long way," Tanner said, his voice full of respect. Grant smiled. "And so have we." As the two species continued to grow together, they knew one thing for certain: their future was no longer uncertain. The Deathworlders had shown them the strength to survive, and Scifi had taught them the power of unity. Together, they were stronger than ever before. The stars above glimmered brightly, a reminder that the galaxy was vast, and that in the face of all odds, peace was possible. With the alliance between the Deathworlders and Scifi, a new chapter had begun, one filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a better future for both species and for the galaxy as a whole.